guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you about 10 things that I wish I knew before having kids or like before having a baby. I remember watching videos like this whenever I was pregnant, or like postpartum tips and stuff like that, or like what's in my hospital bag, and I just felt like they were so helpful. So I honestly could make like several videos about this because there's so much that you learn like after you have a baby that you don't realize, or like things that just aren't talked about whenever you're pregnant, that it's kind of like, why did nobody tell me this? So I'll start by saying I have 2 kids. I have a daughter, Millie, she's 3.5, and then I have a son, Davis, he's almost a year old. So I feel like I've had like my fair share of things that I've ran into that I want to share with you. So for starters, I remember whenever I had my daughter, whenever I first became a mom, it was like a week in, and a little bit of like a backstory. My daughter was colic and just like a very hard baby, and so I remember like just sitting there with my husband one day, and like, you know, she'd woken up and was crying and needed to be fed and all that stuff. And I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this baby's not going away. And like, not that I thought that the baby would go away or I wanted her to go away. It was just like, you kind of come to this realization that like this is permanent, and that like you are this primary caretaker of someone else other than yourself. And you know, like especially in like the newborn stage, you have to be feeding them every like 2 to 3 hours, and then you're like burping them and changing their diaper and putting them to sleep. And so it feels like those first few weeks and few months just can feel like all consuming with this little baby, and it's just such like a shock and to a lot of people. And so that was just something that like nobody really talked about. Like I obviously knew that I would have to feed the baby and all that stuff, but like until you're in it, you don't really realize how it consumes you. So then the next thing that I'll go into is like postpartum. So postpartum was not something that I knew anything about, honestly. Like I obviously knew that it would be hard after having a baby. Like I would probably be sore down there or whatever, but you don't really know until you're in it how your body is going to be and like how your hormones are going to be. And so I remember for me, and like I think the type of baby and like their temperament can depend on how your experience is going to be too. So like I said, with my daughter, she was a little bit more difficult, and so I felt like that kind of like put a lot of stress on myself to like figure a lot of things out. And so like my hormones, I remember like experiencing a lot of rage and just like this all-consuming anxiety and depression. And I never was like clinically diagnosed with depression or anxiety, but like I definitely had it. Granted, I did not go to the doctor for it, which I know a lot of people do, and they get on medication. It really helps them. So please, like if you feel like you're in such a low place, like get help. I wish that I would have, but I honestly was just like so anxious to even get help. I can't even describe it. Like I feel like I was this completely different person the first year of being a mom, like mentally and emotionally. And but then on the flip side, whenever I had my son postpartum, my second time around, you know, they say that, well, I've heard that anxiety and depression can like worsen each pregnancy, and so I was so nervous for that. And so the second time around was like so good. Like I literally had minimal anxiety, like nothing more than just like the normal anxiety, you know, but like I wasn't like constantly checking to see if my son was breathing. Like with my daughter, I would literally be like she would be screaming and crying for hours and nonstop, and like I would try everything and nothing would work. And I remember one time I literally was like, I feel like she broke her arm, or like I literally was like, she has to have a broken bone. And so me and my husband at like midnight drove her to the hospital, And he was like very reluctant. Like he's like, she was just crying so much because she was colic. And so I know in his head, he's like, she doesn't have a broken bone, but like something must be wrong for a baby to just like be unconsolable for hours. And so we drove her to the hospital, and like we pulled into the parking lot, and like we didn't even go in. My husband was like, do you really want to take our newborn into a germ infested hospital? And then like that was another wave of anxiety, like, oh my gosh, is my baby gonna get RSV from going to the emergency room, you know? So we just drove home, and then thankfully our daughter like fell asleep and stopped crying. But yeah, so you just never know how your hormones are gonna be. But like I said, my second time around, it was honestly so much better. I had like the blues for sure. Like I was a little disassociated at first and emotional, you know, but it was more so like a physical pain. So my first time around, I had a 1st-degree tear, and that was it. And it was sore for the first few days, you know, and like your breasts are engorged, which I'll get more into that later. But it wasn't like something as bad as my second time around. I had a 2nd-degree tear, and I had TMI, but like a ton of external hemorrhoids. And I just want to tell you this now, hemorrhoids, mix castor oil and tea tree oil together and lather it on 3 times a day, and they will go away. Like seriously, I had ones that like surgically needed to be removed, and thankfully I found this remedy online and it worked for me. Nothing over the counter worked, nothing touched the pain, nothing shrunk them, nothing but this. And so they to this day have not came back. So seriously, I like try that before surgery. So anyways, I guess that's kind of what I'll say about like postpartum. And then another thing that I want to say is have a conversation with your partner about like how they can help you. So this is another thing, obviously I didn't know my first time around. I was very vulnerable, and I have a hard time speaking up for myself. And so now it's completely changed. Like I'm a mom of 2 now. Like I speak up plenty, probably too much sometimes, but like that's just how I was before becoming a mom. And so I kind of had to like grow into that. Well, with my daughter, my first baby, I had issues breastfeeding, and so I'll get into that later. But a nurse at the hospital actually like made me cry several times, the same nurse. And I wish that I could have spoken up for myself, but I also wish that my husband would have spoken up for me. And I think that we were kind of just like, we didn't really know what to do in those type of situations. And so anyways, my next pregnancy, I told my husband, like I was very pregnant, and I was like, I am mentally weak right now. And like, I know I can get mentally weak whenever I'm in like really stressful situations, and like whenever I'm just overwhelmed. And so I was like, I just need you to like vouch for me if I need to be vouched for. And I was like, just like have my back, you know. And like that's things like, obviously my husband has my back, but I think sometimes he thinks that I can handle things myself, but it's like sometimes I need to like be taken care of, you know. And so I just had to have a conversation with him, and thankfully we didn't run into any situations like that that second time around. But yeah, and then also I'll kind of like tie this into that. Whenever it comes to your spouse, I would definitely just recommend giving them some grace, which in the time being, I felt differently about this. I was like, I'm the one that's pregnant, I'm the one that's delivering, like I'm going through all of these physical, emotional, everything, you know, changes, and like you're not. And so it's like the least that they can do is, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so like now in hindsight, I just like think back to like, especially like whenever we had our first baby, how difficult of a change that had to have been for him, because it's like, for me, I get to be pregnant and grow this baby and bond with this baby through that, and they don't get that at all. The fathers don't. And so it's like, it's gonna take a little bit for that bond to happen with them. Not all the time, but I mean, I can't imagine like being on the flip side and, you know, seeing your significant other carrying a baby and going through labor and how, sorry, my phone is dying. And like how hard that would be. And so I know it was really hard on my husband, even though like maybe in the meantime it came out in different ways between us, but just like give each other grace because you're gonna need it. And just remember, like, you're on the same team and like you both want the same outcome, and that's like to figure this out together. And so just make sure that like you always come into situations like that, and if you feel like your partner is not doing enough for you, they honestly probably just don't know what to do. And that's kind of like the conversation that we ended up having, as my husband was like, I just don't know how to help. Like, I feel like I can't do anything, or, you know, and I mean that in like an emotional sense, or so, you know, you just kind of have to say like, hey, I need this. So now I'm going to go into like breastfeeding and formula feeding and pumping. For me, this is going to be like a lengthy answer too. But for me, with my daughter, she actually did not like to breastfeed. She didn't latch. She was born at 37 weeks. And so that's like borderline full term. It's considered full term, but it's like borderline preemie too. And so for me, like at the hospital, I was having a hard time latching, and the lactation consultant was like, well, she's still kind of young. Like, it could just take her a little bit to learn how to latch. And that is true, but I just knew that there was more to it. Like, she literally would take a bottle but not nurse. And so I started pumping, and then like my milk wasn't coming in, and I didn't want to ever do formula. So I came from a family where like nobody breastfed. Everyone was formula fed. My siblings were formula fed. My mom's mom formula fed all of her kids. And so like breastfeeding was honestly super foreign to me, but I knew that I wanted to breastfeed my kids. And so like I literally was like, yeah, I'm gonna be breastfeeding. Like, why would I formula feed if I'm able to breastfeed? And like, you just latch the baby and they eat. Like, I knew nothing about it. And anyone that I knew that breastfed, it worked for them. And so I just never assumed it wouldn't work for me. And so, yeah, like I was saying, my daughter wasn't latching, so I was like, okay, I'll pump. So I started pumping, and I could tell my supply was like upping, you know, and I was like, okay, this is gonna work, this is great. And then all of a sudden, like, I had a tank in my supply. So, you know, we were always kind of supplementing with formula, and then my daughter was colic, and so I was like, okay, like, should I do like non-dairy? You know, I was just trying to figure this all out. And there's just like so much to it, and that's like a whole nother thing. But long story short, I ended up not being able to breastfeed at about 6 weeks. I stopped pumping, stopped trying to breastfeed, and I just went straight to formula, and that worked well. And I just remember feeling like something is not right. And so my daughter I switched pediatricians because I had been going to this pediatrician, and I had like went to them, and I was like, my daughter, she was like 3 months old at this time, and she had always spit up a ton. And like, I know babies spit up most of them, but this was like projectile vomiting every single bottle, uncomfortable, crying. Like, I needed answers, and I needed like my baby to not be miserable. And so I took her to the doctor, and they looked her over, and they were like, it's just reflux, like just burp her, sit her up for 30 minutes after feeding, and like, that's it. And I'm like, I already do that. You know, like that's not the solution here. And I knew that. And so I switched pediatricians, and that's another thing I want to stop here and say is switch pediatricians if your pediatrician is not figuring things out for you. Like, if you go to a doctor's office and they say, they give you a blanket answer like keep your baby upright and burp, no, you need a different pediatrician. Okay, like, you need somebody who is like, okay, let's figure this out, like let's go through things. Like, if they're not trying to sit there and problem solve with you, then you need to find a different doctor. And you will know this in your heart, like, no, that doesn't feel like that's gonna fix it. It's your mother's intuition, and you need to stick to it. So I switched pediatricians. At about 6 months old, I took my daughter to a new doctor, and immediately the doctor checked her mouth for oral ties, which I had no idea what oral ties were. Like I had never even heard of that. And so it's like, it can be like a lip tie, a tongue tie, or cheek ties, or all three. And so she's like, yeah, her tongue and lip are pretty tied up. Like, you should go to this pediatric dentist and have them look over your baby and like go from there. So that same day I went to that pediatric dentist, and we had her lip and tongue tie revised, and she stopped spitting up immediately, literally solved it. And you know, you always just like kind of go back, and I'm like, would that have solved her colic when she was a baby? Like, had I have had her evaluated for oral ties, you know, like the other pediatrician didn't even check, the lactation consultant didn't even check. And I also know that those people can also overlook ties. And so always go to a pediatric dentist, because that's what they specialize in. And I'm telling you, it was like day and night. So that was that. I also, so fast forward to my second baby, I was kind of in the same situation, but this baby, my son, he loves to breastfeed, so he was latching so well. So I was like, well, I want to start pumping to like build my supply so that I just have some like in the freezer, blah, 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 blah. Well, come to find out, I actually do not respond very well to pumps. I get stuff out of pumps. Like when I pump, I get milk, but I would never be able to exclusively pump because I just don't make enough for that, I don't think, or I don't respond to pumps. And I don't know how to explain it other than I don't respond to pumps. But I have heard of this before. My sister-in-law, she breastfed her babies. She told me one time, and I completely forgot about it, that she can never get anything out of a breast pump. And I was like, that's so weird. And so when I put pumps on, my letdown does not happen. And like, it just doesn't stimulate the way that my baby does. And so that's kind of that. So if you feel like you're not producing enough through a pump, if you can, try to like exclusively breastfeed. And I know that that's not always possible whenever you're working or, you know, whatever. But thankfully for me, I was able to breastfeed exclusively my second baby, and he's still breastfeeding, and it's just worked out so well for us. Like, so if you weren't able to breastfeed your first baby, just switch some things up the second time and maybe it'll work. Because I was like in my head the second time around, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm never going to be able to breastfeed. And here I am breastfeeding. So that was, I'm just so happy that that worked out. And I also want to talk about sleep. I feel like I've had like all of the worst situations happen, and so I'm like, I feel like I can actually talk about this stuff. Sorry, my phone's like sideways. Okay. So my daughter, actually both of my kids, they don't sleep well. I think it's crazy because it's like, I understand if I have like one kid that doesn't sleep well, but like both of my kids don't, which I was never a good sleeper from for as long as I can remember. I would wake up throughout the night as like a toddler or like a young kid. I would have really bad dreams. I could never sleep by myself. I co-slept with my parents for like an obscene amount of time. I won't even say how long I slept with my parents for, and then I moved to my sister's bed, so I could never sleep by myself. And I would always just like wake up through the night, and like to this day, like I don't sleep good. And like now I'm a mom, so yeah, so both of my kids just wake up throughout the night, and they want me. And my daughter's 3.5 and still wakes up once a night. My son is a year and like wakes up 5 times to nurse throughout the night. So to each their own. I know a lot of people, you know, swear by sleep training. It was just like something that I just couldn't do that in my opinion. And I'm sure it would have worked. I always say like my kids probably could not be sleep trained, because they would sit there and cry until they threw up or something, because that's just my kids. They're like relentless. But if your baby is not sleeping good, just know that you can try the hatch, you can try blackout rooms, red light, you know, frequency sounds, you can do it all and your baby can still just not sleep, and there's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your baby. It's just like some people are wired that way, and it's just what it is, you know. And so do what makes you feel comfortable and do what works for your family. So if co-sleeping works for you, just do it safely. And like, you just got to do what you got to do to get some sleep. And you know, with both of my kids piled in the bed with me and my husband, it's not my favorite thing in the world, but like, I do love having my kids close. And like, honestly, whenever they're not with me in the bed, I just like feel so naked and I can't sleep. And so I'm like, wow, this is probably what my kids feel like without me. And that's just like my heart for my kids. And like, I know everyone's so different. Like, some people are like, throw them in the bedroom, like they're gonna figure it out. And if that works for you and your kids, then whatever. But just know that you're not alone and like, you haven't done anything wrong. It's just how it is sometimes. The last thing I want to talk about is, you just don't even understand the love that you're about to experience with your child. Like, giving birth is the most magical thing in the world. Like, it's such an empowering moment, truly. And you know, labor is so hard, but it is one of my favorite things, because it's just like, once you experience it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But like, it's just this outer body experience, and like, meeting your baby is like I crave that feeling. Like, whenever I get baby fever, it's just like, oh, but just to like meet my baby for the first time again, it's just like, it's so magical. That's the only way I know how to describe it, is it's just like, it's so cool. And the love that you're gonna have for your kids is so amazing. Just like, don't ever doubt your intuition. If you feel something in your gut, trust it and vouch for it. And sometimes moms just know more than doctors do in situations like that. Like, if you need to push for more tests or whatever, do it. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like being a mom has been the greatest honor, and I just didn't know how much I would enjoy it and love it and thrive in it until I became a mom. And like, being a mom makes me just want to keep being a better person and like, you know, eat healthier so I can be here longer and so that I can see their children and all that stuff. And so yeah, like, the best is yet to come if you have not had your baby yet, because even in the hardest days and the trenches of motherhood and everything, it's just like, but I would go back and do it all over again 1,000 times just to like be their mom, you know. And so anyways, yeah, I love being a mom. And so just hang in there and know that it is not forever, and maybe you'll have the best experience ever and your babies will be easy, your deliveries will be easy and all that stuff, but maybe it won't be. And I just want you to listen to this and just know that you're not alone, that there's nothing wrong with you or your baby, and that it'll all work itself out. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys.